The year was 1901. It was a time when the world was on the cusp of modernity, yet still deeply rooted in the traditions and practices of the past. The turn of the century brought with it a sense of hope and progress, but in the quiet town of Cambridge, Massachusetts, a dark and sinister chapter was about to unfold. A dark secret was about to unravel in the seemingly sterile halls of Cambridge Hospital. The hospital, a place where the sick sought solace and healing, was about to become the epicenter of a chilling mystery. The corridors, once bustling with the sounds of doctors and nurses attending to their patients, would soon echo with whispers of fear and suspicion. Patients, entrusted to the care of medical professionals, were dying at an alarming rate. These were not just any patients, they were individuals with families, hopes, and dreams. Each death was a blow to the community, but the frequency and pattern of these deaths began to raise eyebrows. The hospital staff, initially dismissing the deaths as unfortunate coincidences, started to notice a disturbing trend. Whispers turned to suspicions, and suspicions soon solidified into a horrific truth. The air was thick with tension, as the staff and patients alike began to fear the worst. Conversations behind closed doors, furtive glances, and the ever-present sense of dread became the new normal. The once trusted walls of the hospital now seemed to close in, harboring a dark secret. Over 30 patients, once under the care of nurse Jane Toppan, had breathed their last. Jane Toppan, a nurse who had taken an oath to heal and protect, was now at the center of a storm. Her demeanor, once seen as caring and compassionate, was now viewed with suspicion. The community was in shock, struggling to reconcile the image of the kind nurse with the emerging allegations. Their deaths, deemed natural at the time, were now shrouded in suspicion. The number was staggering. Each death certificate, once a mere formality, now seemed to hold a sinister secret. Families mourned their loved ones, unaware of the dark truth that lay behind their untimely demise. The graveyard, with its rows of tombstones, became a silent testament to the tragedy that had befallen the community. 30 lives cut short, with Jane Toppan as the common thread. The realization was both shocking and heartbreaking. How could someone entrusted with the care of the vulnerable betray that trust so completely? The hospital records, once mundane and routine, now read like a macabre ledger of death. Each entry a life lost, each name a story cut tragically short. But the true horror was yet to be fully grasped. As the investigation deepened, the community braced itself for more revelations. The fog of uncertainty and fear hung heavy, and the full extent of the tragedy was still unfolding. The shockwaves of the discovery rippled through the town, leaving no one untouched. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a chilling possibility. The body count might be far higher. The meticulous examination of records, interviews with staff, and the re-evaluation of past deaths painted a grim picture. The scope of Jane Toppan's actions was becoming clearer, and it was far more horrifying than anyone had initially imagined. Some whispered that Toppan was responsible for as many as 100 deaths. The rumors spread like wildfire, each new piece of information adding to the growing sense of dread. Newspaper headlines screamed of the high death tolls, and the community was left grappling with the enormity of the situation. The whispers, once confined to the hospital, now echoed through the streets of Cambridge. The woman who had pledged to heal had instead unleashed a reign of terror, leaving a trail of corpses in her wake. Jane Toppan's actions were a betrayal of the highest order. The image of the nurturing nurse was forever tarnished, replaced by the chilling reality of a cold-blooded killer. Her hands, once instruments of healing, were now seen as tools of death. The image of a caring nurse was shattered, replaced by the chilling visage of a cold-blooded killer. The duality of Jane Toppan's persona was stark and unsettling. How could someone so seemingly kind and gentle harbor such dark intentions? The community was left to grapple with this disturbing dichotomy, struggling to understand how they had been so deceived. The air crackled with tension. Fear gripped the community. The once peaceful town of Cambridge was now a place of anxiety and suspicion. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, and every stranger was viewed with mistrust. The sense of safety and security had been shattered, replaced by an all-encompassing fear. Hospitals, places meant for healing, now felt like hunting grounds. The very institutions designed to protect and heal had become places of fear and death. The empty hospital beds, once symbols of recovery, now stood as silent witnesses to the horrors that had unfolded. The flickering lights in the corridors added to the eerie atmosphere, casting long shadows that seemed to whisper of the past. The realization dawned that a monster had walked among them, hiding in plain sight. The community was left to grapple with the horrifying truth that Jane Toppan, the nurse they had trusted, was a monster in disguise. The shock and disbelief were palpable as people tried to come to terms with the fact that they had been living alongside a serial killer. And as the investigation into Jane Toppan's crimes began, a macabre and deeply unsettling portrait of a serial killer began to emerge. The meticulous work of the investigators slowly pieced together the extent of her crimes. Each new discovery added to the growing horror, painting a picture of a woman who had used her position of trust to commit unspeakable acts. The community braced itself for the full revelation of the nightmare that had unfolded in their midst. Jane Toppan, the woman at the center of the storm, had a nickname that sent shivers down the spines of those who knew her: Jolly Jane. This seemingly cheerful moniker was a stark contrast to the darkness she harbored within. Her outwardly friendly and jovial demeanor masked a deeply sinister nature, one that would eventually be revealed in the most horrifying of ways. This moniker, a chilling contrast to the darkness she harbored, was a testament to her deceptively cheerful demeanor. To her patients and colleagues, she was the epitome of kindness and care, always ready with a smile and a comforting word. But behind this facade, Jane Toppan was hiding a terrifying secret. Behind her bright facade, however, lurked a sinister secret. Jane was not just a nurse, she was a predator, using her position of trust to carry out her dark desires. Her fascination with death was not just a passing curiosity, it was an obsession that drove her to commit unspeakable acts. Toppan possessed a fascination with death, a morbid curiosity that would ultimately lead her down a path of unimaginable cruelty. She was intrigued by the process of dying, the transition from life to death, and she wanted to be in control of that process. This morbid curiosity was the driving force behind her actions, pushing her to experiment with life and death in the most horrific ways. Her weapon of choice? A lethal cocktail of morphine and atropine. These drugs, when used correctly, could save lives, but in the hands of Jane Toppan, they became tools of death. She knew exactly how to use them to achieve her deadly goals. Morphine, a powerful painkiller, could, in excessive doses, slow the heart to a standstill. It was a drug that was meant to alleviate suffering, but Jane used it to cause the ultimate suffering: death. She would administer just enough to bring her victims to the brink, watching as they struggled for life. Atropine, often used to dilate pupils, could accelerate the heart rate and cause respiratory failure. This drug too was meant to help patients, but in Jane's hands it became another instrument of her deadly game. She would use it to create a terrifying balance of life and death, pushing her victims to the edge. Toppan, with her nursing knowledge, understood the deadly potential of these drugs. She had studied them extensively, learning how to manipulate their effects to achieve her desired outcome. Her medical training, which should have been used to save lives, was instead used to take them. She knew how to manipulate their effects to orchestrate a slow and agonizing demise for her victims. Each injection was carefully calculated, each dose meticulously measured to ensure that her victims would suffer as much as possible before they died. The ease with which she obtained these substances was unsettling. In the hospitals where she worked, she had unrestricted access to the pharmaceutical stores. She could take as much morphine and atropine as she wanted, and no one would question her. As a nurse, she had access to the hospital's pharmaceutical stores. This access allowed her to gather the tools she needed to carry out her deadly experiments. She could take what she needed without raising any suspicion. No one questioned her withdrawals, her requests for morphine or atropine. To her colleagues, she was just another nurse doing her job. They had no idea that she was using these drugs to kill. After all, she was a trusted medical professional. Her reputation as a kind and caring nurse meant that no one would ever suspect her of such heinous acts. She used this trust to her advantage, hiding her true intentions behind a mask of compassion. Toppan exploited this trust, transforming life-saving medications into instruments of death. She took advantage of the trust placed in her by her patients and colleagues, using it to carry out her deadly deeds without fear of being caught. And so, under the guise of care and compassion, she carried out her deadly deeds, her victims none the wiser to the poison coursing through their veins. They trusted her, believed that she was there to help them, never suspecting that she was the one causing their suffering. Jane Toppan's story is a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind even the most benign of facades. Jane Toppan was a master manipulator. She possessed an uncanny ability to identify and exploit the vulnerabilities of her victims. Her patients, often elderly or already grappling with illness, saw her as a beacon of hope, a comforting presence in their time of need. Little did they know that the hand that adjusted their pillows also held their lives in its grasp. Toppan would shower her victims with attention, offering a sympathetic ear and words of comfort. She would feign concern, monitoring their every symptom with feigned worry. Her patients, starved for human connection, readily accepted her kindness, unaware that they were being lured into a deadly game. They were like lambs led to slaughter, completely oblivious to the danger that lurked behind Toppan's warm smile and gentle touch. Toppan's manipulations ran deep. She craved control, relishing the power she wielded over her victims. She would deliberately adjust their dosages, inducing states of delirium and confusion. This only served to strengthen their dependence on her, making them more susceptible to her manipulations. In their weakened and disoriented state, they were easy prey, unable to see the malevolence behind her actions. The most chilling aspect of Jane Toppan's crimes was not just the act of killing, but her chilling obsession with the process of dying. She wasn't content with simply administering the fatal doses. She needed to witness their agonizing demise firsthand. Toppan was drawn to the moment of death like a moth to a flame, finding a perverse thrill in the slow extinction of life. She would often climb into bed with her victims, holding them close as they took their last breath. The warmth of their dying bodies, the shallow gasps for air, the fading pulse, these were all sources of perverse pleasure for Toppan. Her actions were beyond cruel. They were the actions of someone profoundly disturbed, someone who found a twisted sense of satisfaction in the suffering of others. Toppan's actions defied all norms of human compassion. Nurses were meant to be caregivers, their presence a source of comfort and reassurance. Toppan, however, had twisted this sacred role into something sinister. She had turned the sanctity of the deathbed into her own personal theater of the macabre, where she played the dual roles of both director and audience in a grisly performance of death. Jane Toppan's fascination with death began early in her career. As a nurse, she had access to vulnerable patients, and she exploited this access to fulfill her dark desires. Her methods were meticulous, often involving a combination of drugs that would prolong the suffering of her victims. She took great care in selecting her victims, often choosing those who were already weak or terminally ill, ensuring that their deaths would not raise immediate suspicion. Toppan's actions were not just about the act of killing, they were about control. She reveled in the power she held over life and death, manipulating her victims' final moments to suit her own twisted fantasies. This need for control extended beyond her patients to her colleagues and superiors, whom she often deceived with her outward appearance of competence and care. Her ability to mask her true intentions allowed her to continue her killing spree for years, leaving a trail of unsuspecting victims in her wake. It was only when her actions became too brazen, and the number of unexplained deaths too high, that suspicions began to arise. Even then, it took a considerable amount of time and investigation to uncover the full extent of her crimes. The revelation of Jane Toppan's actions sent shockwaves through the medical community and the public. How could someone entrusted with the care of the sick and dying betray that trust so profoundly? Her case became a chilling reminder of the potential for darkness within the human soul, and the importance of vigilance in the face of such evil. Jane Toppan's story is a macabre fascination, a dark chapter in the history of medicine that continues to haunt us. It serves as a stark warning of the dangers of unchecked power and the depths of human depravity. Her legacy is a grim testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest threats come from those we trust the most.